The old cassette recorder was wedged deep inside the piano's cavity, wrapped in a plastic bag and taped to the soundboard like a secret that had been waiting 15 years to be discovered. I'd only found it because I was finally moving Mom's beloved Steinway out of the house, the same piano where she spent countless evenings playing Chopin while Dad read his newspaper and I did homework at the kitchen table back when we were still a family. Mom had been dead for 3 months now, killed by a drunk driver on a rainy Tuesday evening that had torn our quiet suburban life apart. The piano had sat untouched since the funeral, a monument to the music that would never fill our house again. But the estate sale was tomorrow, and I couldn't bear the thought of strangers playing the keys where Mom's fingers had created so much beauty. As the movers lifted the piano onto its side to navigate the narrow doorway, I heard something rattling inside the cavity that shouldn't have been there. Piano strings, hammers, and felt don't rattle. When I shined my phone's flashlight into the dark interior, I saw the plastic bag and knew immediately that Mom had hidden it there deliberately. The recorder was ancient, probably from the 1980s, but it was in perfect condition and the battery still worked. My hands shook as I pressed play, expecting to hear one of Mom's practice sessions or maybe a recording of me as a child attempting to play Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star. Instead, I heard my mother's voice, hushed and urgent in a way I'd never heard before. My name is Sarah Chen Morrison, and I'm recording this on March 15, 2008. If anyone is hearing this, it probably means something has happened to me and it may already be too late to prevent what's coming. Emma, if this is you, I need you to know that everything we've told you about our family has been a lie. I paused the recording, my heart hammering against my ribs. March 15, 2008 was exactly 1 day before my 13th birthday, 6 years before Mom died in that car accident. She'd hidden this recording when I was still a child, like she'd been planning for her own death for years. Your father is not who he says he is. His real name isn't Robert Morrison. I don't know what his real name is, but I've discovered documents that prove he's been living under a false identity since before we met. Emma, I'm scared of what he might do if he finds out I know. The recording crackled with static, but Mom's voice continued with growing desperation. There are things about our family, about you, that I've never been able to tell you. Dangerous things that could get us all killed if the wrong people found out. I've been trying to protect you for 13 years, but I don't know how much longer I can keep our secrets hidden. If something happens to me, don't trust your father. Don't trust anyone. Take this recording to Detective Martinez at the police station on 5th Street. Tell her Sarah Chen sent you, and that it's about the Riverside case. She know what that means. The recording ended abruptly, leaving me sitting on my childhood bedroom floor with a cassette recorder that had just accused my father of being a dangerous imposter and my mother of being someone named Sarah Chen instead of Sarah Morrison. I'd lived in this house for my entire 28 years. I'd grown up thinking I understood my family, my history, my place in the world. But the woman on this recording sounded like a stranger, frightened, secretive, speaking about cases and false identities and dangers that had no connection to the quiet suburban life I remembered. My father was downstairs in his study, probably grading papers for his high school history classes like he did every evening. The man I know my entire life as a gentle, scholarly introvert who wore cardigan sweaters and collected vintage books. The man who'd held me when I cried at Mom's funeral, who'd been devastated by her death in ways that seemed too genuine to be an act. But if Mom's recording was telling the truth, then the man downstairs wasn't Robert Morrison at all, but someone else entirely, someone dangerous enough that my mother had spent years living in fear of what he might do. I rewound the cassette and listened again, hoping I'd misunderstood or that it was some kind of elaborate joke. But Mom's voice was too serious, too frightened, too specific about dates and names and places for this to be anything but the truth. My mother had died believing that my father was a threat to our family, and she'd left this recording as a warning for me to discover after her death. The question was, what was I going to do with this information? I found Dad in his study exactly where I'd expected him to be, surrounded by towers of ungraded history tests and wearing the same navy blue cardigan he'd owned since I was a teenager. The warm lamplight made him look older than his 55 years, and I could see the grief in the way his shoulders curved over his desk. He'd aged rapidly since Mom's death, as if losing her had broken something fundamental inside him. "Dad, I need to show you something," I said, holding the cassette recorder behind my back. "I found it when we were moving the piano." He looked up with the mild interest I'd come to expect from him, the same expression he'd worn when I brought him childhood drawings or report cards or boyfriends to meet. Robert Morrison had always been a patient, gentle man who approached everything with scholarly consideration. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, setting down his red pen and giving me his full attention. I placed the recorder on his desk and pressed play, watching his face carefully as Mom's voice filled the study. "My name is Sarah Chen Morrison, and I'm recording this on March 15, 2008. The change in my father's expression was immediate and terrifying. The mild academic demeanor vanished completely, replaced by something cold and predatory that I'd never seen before. His eyes went dead in a way that made my skin crawl, and when he looked at me, it was like being assessed by a dangerous stranger. "Where did you find this?" His voice was different too, harder, with an accent I couldn't identify but had never heard from him before. "In the piano." "Dad, what is she talking about? What did she mean about false identities?" And he moved faster than I would have thought possible, lunging across the desk and grabbing the recorder from my hands with violent efficiency. In one smooth motion, he ripped out the cassette tape and began pulling the brown magnetic ribbon from the cartridge, destroying the recording with methodical precision. "Dad, what are you doing?" I backed toward the study door, suddenly afraid of the man who'd raised me. "Why are you destroying it?" "Because your mother was a paranoid woman who couldn't leave well enough alone," he said, his voice carrying a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "Because some secrets are meant to stay buried, Emma." He finished destroying the cassette and stood up from his desk with movements that seemed too controlled, too practiced, like he'd done violence before and knew exactly how to manage the mechanics of it. "You need to forget what you heard on that recording," he said, walking slowly toward me with the patience of a predator who knew his prey was trapped. "Your mother was sick, Emma. Delusional. The things she said about me, about our family, none of it was true. But I could see the truth in his eyes now, in the way he moved, in the complete transformation of his personality from gentle scholar to something infinitely more dangerous. She was right, wasn't she?" I whispered. "You're not really Robert Morrison." Dad stopped moving and smiled, but it wasn't the warm expression I remembered from my childhood. It was the smile of someone who'd been wearing a mask for decades and was finally relieved to take it off. "Your mother should have minded her own business," he said quietly. "She'd still be alive if she hadn't started digging into things that didn't concern her." The implications hit me like ice water. "You killed her." "The car accident wasn't an accident," he finished calmly. "Sarah got too curious about our family history. She started asking questions that could have gotten us all killed by people much more dangerous than me. So I had to make a choice. I ran for the study door, but he was faster. His hand closed around my wrist with a grip that would leave bruises, and when I looked into his face, I saw absolutely no trace of the father who'd raised me. "Emma," he said with gentle menace, "we need to have a conversation about what happens next. About whether you're going to be smart like I've always hoped, or curious like your mother." I managed to break free from Dad's grip and ran upstairs to my childhood bedroom, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. But I knew the lock wouldn't stop someone who just admitted to murdering my mother. I had maybe minutes before he decided that I'd learned too much to be allowed to live. Through my bedroom window, I could see into the backyard where I'd played as a child, where Dad had pushed me on a swing set and taught me to ride a bicycle. The normalcy of the memories felt like a mockery now that I understood they'd all been lies, performances by a man whose real identity I didn't even know. I grabbed my laptop and car keys, then climbed out my second-story window using the old oak tree that had been my secret escape route during high school. Dad's study was at the front of the house, so I had a chance of reaching my car without him seeing me if I moved quickly. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, I could see Dad's silhouette in the study window, motionless and patient, as if he knew I'd be back eventually. The sight made my hands shake on the steering wheel. I drove to the public library downtown, needing internet access and a public place where I could research without being found. The recording had mentioned Detective Martinez on 5th Street and something called the Riverside case. If Mom had been telling the truth about everything else, then maybe this detective could help me understand what was happening to my family. There was no Detective Martinez currently working at the 5th Street police station, but the desk sergeant remembered an officer named Carmen Martinez who'd worked there until her retirement in 2019. She specialized in missing persons cases and had a particular interest in unsolved disappearances dating back to the 1990s. I found Carmen Martinez's phone number in the public directory and called her from the library's payphone, my hands trembling as I dialed. "Martinez," she answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with dangerous situations. "Detective Martinez? My name is Emma Morrison. My mother told me to contact you about the Riverside case. She said to tell you Sarah Chun sent me." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally she spoke, her voice tight with emotion. "Sarah Chun has been dead for 15 years. That's impossible. Sarah Chun was my mother. She died 3 months ago in a car accident. Sarah Chen disappeared in 2008 after she called me about a man she'd been living with under false pretenses. She was terrified, said she'd discovered that her husband had assumed someone else's identity and that she had evidence he'd killed the real Robert Morrison." My legs gave out and I sank into the library chair as the implications hit me. "My mother was the missing person in your case. Your mother was scheduled to meet me on March 16, 2008. To turn over evidence about her husband's real identity. She never showed up. We found her car abandoned near Riverside Park, but no body was ever recovered. I thought about the recording date March 15, 2008. Mom had made the recording the day before she was supposed to meet with Detective Martinez, which meant she'd known she was in danger when she hid it in the piano. Detective Martinez, the man I thought was my father, just admitted to killing her. And I think he's going to try to kill me too. Where are you now?" I told her about the library, about finding the recording, about Dad's terrifying transformation when I'd shown it to him. "Emma, listen to me very carefully," Martinez said. "The man you've been living with for 15 years is not your father, and if Sarah Chun was your mother, then you were likely kidnapped as a child and have been living with your mother's killer your entire life." The room spun around me as I processed what she was telling me. Everything I believed about my identity, my family, my life, was a lie built on murder and kidnapping. "I'm sending officers to pick you up right now," Martinez continued. "Don't go anywhere. Don't trust anyone, and don't go back to that house. If the man calling himself Robert Morrison realizes you've spoken to the police, he'll disappear and we'll never find him." But even as Martinez spoke, I could see through the library windows that I was too late. A familiar navy blue sedan was pulling into the parking lot, and behind the wheel was the man who'd spent 15 years pretending to be my father, while hiding the truth about murdering my mother. He'd found me, and judging by the calm expression on his face, he'd come to finish what he started. I hung up on Detective Martinez and ran toward the library's back exit. But Dad was already inside, moving through the stacks with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew all the exits were covered. He'd changed clothes since I'd left the house. Gone was the cardigan-wearing professor, replaced by someone in dark clothing who moved like he'd done this before. "Emma," he called softly, his voice echoing through the mostly empty library. "There's no point in running. We need to finish our conversation." I hid behind the reference section, my heart hammering as I tried to think of a way out. The library had a back entrance, but I'd have to cross open floor to reach it, and Dad would see me the moment I left cover. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "2nd floor, northeast stairwell. Police are 3 minutes out." Detective Martinez had somehow gotten access to the library's security system, and was watching the situation unfold in real time. I crept toward the stairwell she'd indicated, staying low behind the bookstacks while Dad continued his methodical search of the main floor. The second floor was darker, filled with archive materials and older books that rarely saw visitors. I found a computer terminal in the genealogy section and quickly pulled up search results for Robert Morrison missing person and Sarah Chen disappearance. What I found made my hands shake. The real Robert Morrison had been a high school history teacher who disappeared from his home in Portland, Oregon, in 2007. His car was found abandoned, his credit cards unused, his family mystified by his sudden vanishing. The missing person report included a photograph that looked exactly like the man who'd raised me, but the dates were wrong. Robert Morrison had disappeared 6 months before my mother made her recording, which meant the man calling himself my father had murdered the real Robert Morrison, assumed his identity, and somehow convinced my mother to move across the country to start a new life. But Mom had eventually discovered the truth, had found evidence of what her husband really was. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly printed the missing person reports, stuffing them into my jacket as Dad's voice echoed from the stairwell. Emma, your mother found these same records. That's why she had to die. That's why she started asking questions about our move from Portland, about why I didn't have any childhood friends or family photographs. I moved deeper into the archives, looking for another way down to the first floor. But Dad's voice was getting closer, and I realized he was herding me toward the back of the building where no one would see what happened next. Do you know what your mother's mistake was? He continued conversationally. She assumed I was the dangerous one. She never considered that I might be protecting both of you from something much worse. I found a service elevator and pressed the button, praying it would arrive before Dad found me. But his voice was coming from right behind me now, calm and patient as he closed the distance. The people I'm hiding from don't care about innocent families, Emma. They don't care about collateral damage or children or women who ask too many questions. Your mother's curiosity would have gotten all of us killed if I hadn't acted first. The elevator doors opened just as Dad rounded the corner and I dove inside, hitting the ground floor button frantically. But he was too fast. His hand caught the door before it could close, and he stepped into the small space with me. The real tragedy, he said, studying my face with clinical interest, is that after 15 years of careful protection, you're going to force me to make the same choice I made with your mother. Through the elevator's small window, I could see police cars pulling into the library parking lot with their lights flashing but sirens silent. Detective Martinez had kept her word about the 3-minute response time. But I was trapped in an elevator with a man who spent 15 years perfecting his cover identity. And I was beginning to understand that whoever he really was, he was far more dangerous than a simple murderer hiding from his crimes. Dad, I said quietly, who are you really? He smiled, and for the first time in 15 years, the expression looked genuine. Someone who's been keeping you alive since you were 13 years old, he said. Someone who killed your mother because loving her was going to get you killed. And someone who's going to have to disappear tonight because you couldn't leave well enough alone. The elevator reached the ground floor, and through the opening doors, I could see police officers entering the library with weapons drawn. Dad looked at the approaching officers, then back at me, and his expression was almost sad. Your mother never understood that some secrets are worth killing for, he said quietly. I hope you're smarter than she was. Detective Martinez took me to the police station while a tactical team processed the library scene. But Dad, whoever he really was, had vanished by the time officers reached the elevator. The security cameras showed him simply walking out the front entrance as police entered through the back, disappearing into the night with the same methodical efficiency he'd shown in everything else. Emma, Detective Martinez said as we sat in her office, surrounded by case files that looked like they'd been accumulating for years. I need you to understand that nothing about your situation is simple. The man who raised you isn't just a murderer hiding his crimes. He's someone that multiple law enforcement agencies have been trying to identify for over 2 decades. She opened a file thick with photographs and documents, spreading them across her desk like pieces of a puzzle that had never been properly solved. We call him the caretaker, Martinez explained. Starting in the 1990s, we began noticing a pattern. Families would disappear, always a parent and child, always after the parent had discovered something dangerous or illegal. Sometimes we'd find the parent's body, sometimes not. But the children always vanished completely. The photographs showed crime scenes from across the country, missing person reports, surveillance images of a man who looked like dad but in different contexts, different time periods, sometimes with different families. We think he's some kind of professional cleaner, Martinez continued. Someone hired to eliminate problems for organized crime, corporate interests, or government operations that need to stay hidden. But his method is unique. Instead of just killing threats, he integrates himself into their families, studies them for months or years, then eliminates the adults and takes the children. Takes them where? That's what we've never been able to figure out. We've documented at least 12 cases where the caretaker has assumed false identities and lived with families before making them disappear. But we've never found any of the missing children. And we've never been able to identify his real name or background. Martinez showed me a timeline that made my stomach drop. The pattern went back 25 years, with families disappearing every 2 to 3 years in different states, always following the same method. A parent would discover something dangerous. The caretaker would appear in their lives as a romantic partner or helpful friend, and within months the family would vanish. Emma, according to our timeline, you're the first missing child we've ever been able to locate. You're the key to understanding what happened to dozens of other families, but it was the final document in the file that made me understand why Dad has seemed so concerned about protecting me from something worse. Sarah Chen wasn't just a random woman who got curious about her husband's identity, Martinez said. She was a federal prosecutor who'd been investigating money laundering operations for international criminal organizations. Her disappearance wasn't about domestic violence or a husband with a hidden past. She was targeted because of her work. She was targeted because she'd identified key players in a criminal network that's worth billions of dollars. And when the caretaker was hired to eliminate her, he made a decision that broke his established pattern. Martinez pulled out a photograph that made my hands shake. It showed Dad walking out of a courthouse with a woman I recognized as my mother. But they both looked younger, happier, like a couple in love rather than predator and victim. Instead of killing Sarah Chen immediately, he spent 2 years in a relationship with her. He moved her across the country, helped her build a new identity, seemed genuinely committed to protecting her from the people who wanted her dead. But he killed her anyway. He killed her when she started investigating his identity, yes. But Emma, we think he did it because her curiosity was going to expose them both to the criminal organization that had originally hired him. The caretaker broke his professional protocol to protect her, and when that protection became impossible, he chose to eliminate the threat rather than let both of you be killed. The implications were staggering. The man I'd known as my father wasn't just a killer, he was a professional assassin who'd gone rogue to protect my mother, then killed her when protection became impossible. What about the other children? The ones who disappeared with their families? Martinez's expression darkened. We think he's been raising them, Emma, somewhere isolated, somewhere off the grid. We think the caretaker has been building a family of stolen children. Kids whose parents had to be eliminated for various criminal or political reasons. A family of orphans created by murder. Yeah, family that he's been protecting from the same forces that killed their parents. Emma, what if the caretaker isn't the monster we've been assuming he is? What if he's been saving these children from something worse? Through the police station windows, I could see the sun setting over a city that suddenly felt foreign and dangerous. The man who'd raised me wasn't my father, but he might have been the only thing standing between me and people who wouldn't hesitate to kill a child to protect their secrets. And now that he was gone, I was completely exposed to whatever forces had originally wanted mother dead. I spent the night in protective custody at the police station, but by morning it was clear that the caretaker's disappearance had triggered something much larger than a simple manhunt. Detective Martinez received calls from federal agencies, international law enforcement, and organizations I never heard of all suddenly interested in the case that had been gathering dust for 15 years. Emma, Martinez said as she hung up from her fourth call of the morning, we have a problem. Word has gotten out that we've located one of the caretaker's children, and now everyone wants to talk to you. She showed me a list of agencies that had requested interviews: FBI, CIA, Interpol, and several other acronyms that she explained were classified organizations dealing with international crime and terrorism. Your mother's murder wasn't an isolated incident, Martinez explained. Sarah Chen was killed because she'd identified financial networks that dozens of government agencies have been trying to trace for years. If the caretaker has been protecting you from these people, then your testimony could be the key to shutting down criminal operations worth billions of dollars. But it was the final call that made Martinez's face go pale with concern. That was my supervisor, she said after hanging up. 3 federal agents are on their way to interview you, but their credentials don't match any agency in our system. Someone is impersonating law enforcement to get access to you. The implications hit me immediately. The criminal organizations that had wanted my mother dead 15 years ago now knew exactly where I was, and they were sending people to eliminate the loose end that Dad had spent decades protecting. We're moving you to a safe house, Martinez said, but even as she spoke, I could see through the office window that it was too late. 3 black sedans had pulled into the police station parking lot, and the men getting out of them didn't look like federal agents. They looked like the kind of people who made problems disappear permanently. Back exit, Martinez said urgently, grabbing her service weapon and a file folder thick with evidence. There's a service tunnel that connects to the courthouse next door. We can get you out without them seeing. But as we moved toward the rear of the building, I realized the police station was already surrounded. Through every window, I could see men in dark suits positioning themselves at all the exits, professional and patient as they established a perimeter. Detective Martinez, a voice called over the police station's intercom system. Calm and authoritative, please bring Emma Morrison to the front desk. We just want to talk. They've compromised our communications, Martinez whispered, leading me down a hallway I'd never seen before. These aren't federal agents. Emma, these are the people the caretaker has been hiding you from for 15 years. We reached the service tunnel, but it was blocked by 2 men who'd obviously been waiting for us. Martinez drew her weapon, but she was outnumbered and outgunned by people who'd been planning this operation for longer than we'd been aware of the threat. Ms. Morrison, one of the men said politely, please come with us. We have some questions about your father's work over the past 2 decades. He's not my father, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. No, he's not. But he's been very effective at keeping you hidden from people who have a legitimate interest in your mother's research. The man smiled, but it was the kind of professional courtesy that preceded violence. We represent the financial networks that Sarah Chen was investigating before her unfortunate death. You mean the criminal organizations she was prosecuting. We mean the business interests that she misunderstood due to incomplete information. Miss Morrison, your mother's files contained financial records that could cause significant disruption to international markets if they were misinterpreted by law enforcement. Martinez stepped protectively in front of me, but I could see in her eyes that she knew this wasn't a situation that could be resolved through police procedures. The caretaker understood the importance of keeping certain information confidential, the man continued. He's been protecting you not just from us, but from the economic chaos that would result if your mother's research became public. We simply want to ensure that protection continues. By killing me, by offering you the same arrangement your guardian has had for 20 years. Comfortable obscurity in exchange for discretion about your mother's work. Through the tunnel entrance, I could see more men approaching, and I realized that Detective Martinez and I were trapped with nowhere to run. The people who'd wanted my mother dead had finally found me, and they were offering me the same choice the caretaker had faced: cooperate with their cover-up, or be eliminated as a threat to their operations. But there was something they didn't know, something Dad had been preparing me for without my knowledge. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Basement level 3. Emergency exit behind boiler room. You have 60 seconds. TC. The caretaker was still watching, still protecting me, even after I destroyed his carefully maintained cover identity. The question was whether I trusted him enough to follow his instructions, or whether this was just another manipulation by someone who'd built his entire relationship with me on lies and murder. I followed the caretaker's instructions, slipping away from Detective Martinez and the armed men while they negotiated terms that I knew would end with everyone but the criminals dead. The basement of the police station was a maze of storage rooms and mechanical equipment, but his directions were precise down 2 flights of service stairs, past the evidence locker, behind the boiler room to an emergency exit that opened onto a loading dock. A motorcycle was waiting with the engine running, and the caretaker was dressed in clothing I'd never seen before, tactical gear that made him look like someone who'd spent decades in dangerous situations rather than teaching high school history. Get on, he said without preamble. We have maybe 3 minutes before they realize you're gone. I don't trust you, I said, even as I climbed onto the bike behind him. You murdered my mother. I killed Sarah Chun because keeping her alive would have gotten you tortured to death by people who don't care about collateral damage. He replied, pulling away from the loading dock with professional efficiency. Would you have preferred that outcome? We rode through back streets and industrial areas, staying off main roads where the criminal organization's people might intercept us. But I could see in the motorcycle's mirrors that we were being followed, black sedans that maintained careful distance while coordinating our pursuit through radio communications. Where are we going? I asked. Somewhere safe. Somewhere I can explain 15 years of choices that probably seem incomprehensible to you right now. The safe house turned out to be an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, but when the caretaker led me inside, it was clear that he'd been preparing this location for years. The space was equipped with surveillance equipment, communications gear, and enough supplies to support a long siege. My real name is Marcus Chun, he said as he activated security systems that sealed the warehouse exits. Sarah Chun was my younger sister. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Sister? Sarah was a federal prosecutor investigating money laundering operations that stretched from Portland to Hong Kong. She'd identified financial networks that several governments wanted to keep hidden, not just criminal organizations, but intelligence agencies and multinational corporations that used the same systems for classified operations. Marcus showed me photographs and documents that told a story completely different from what I believed about my family. Sarah Chun had been his sister, not my mother. The man I'd known as Robert Morrison was actually Marcus Chen, a federal agent who'd been assigned to protect his own sister when she'd uncovered evidence that threatened multiple international interests. When Sarah's identity was compromised, I was ordered to relocate her and create a cover story that would keep her hidden until her testimony could be used in court, Marcus continued. But the organizations she was investigating had resources that exceeded anything our agency had anticipated. So you became Robert Morrison and moved her to a suburban life where no one would think to look. I became a high school history teacher with a wife and stepdaughter, yes. It was supposed to be temporary 6 months until the federal case was ready to proceed. But Sarah started getting suspicious about inconsistencies in my cover identity. Marcus pulled out files that showed the real complexity of what they'd been facing. Sarah Chun's research had exposed financial networks that connected organized crime, corporate interests, and government operations across multiple countries. Her testimony wouldn't just have sent criminals to prison, it would have revealed classified operations and destabilized international markets. When Sarah started investigating Robert Morrison's background, she was unknowingly compromising a federal operation that involved dozens of agencies and hundreds of millions of dollars in covert funding, Marcus said. Her curiosity was going to expose not just her location, but the entire network of agents and assets that were protecting other witnesses in related cases. So you killed her to protect other people. I killed her to prevent a security breach that would have resulted in the deaths of 12 federal witnesses and their families. Marcus's voice carried the weight of someone who'd been living with an impossible choice for 15 years. Emma, your mother, your real mother, was an innocent woman who died because she asked the wrong questions at the wrong time. My real mother? Marcus showed me the final piece of evidence that explained everything I never understood about my own identity. Emma Morrison wasn't Sarah Chun's daughter, she was the daughter of the real Robert Morrison, the high school teacher who'd been murdered to create Marcus's cover identity. When I eliminated the real Robert Morrison to assume his identity, I discovered he had a 13-year-old daughter who would have been orphaned by his death. Taking you with us wasn't part of my original mission, but abandoning you would have raised questions about Morrison's disappearance. You stole me from my real life to make your cover story more believable. I saved you from foster care and gave you a stable home with a woman who genuinely loved you as her own daughter. Marcus corrected. Sarah Chen might not have been your biological mother, but she raised you for 6 years with more devotion than most parents show their natural children. The warehouse's security system activated with a series of alarms that indicated we were surrounded. Through the reinforced windows, I could see the same black sedans that had followed us from the police station, along with additional vehicles that suggested the criminal organizations had called in significant resources. Emma, Marcus said, checking weapons that he'd obviously been maintaining for years. The people outside want to eliminate you because you represent a connection to evidence that could destroy their operations. But they also want to capture me alive because I have information about federal operations that they could sell to hostile governments. What are you saying? I'm saying we're both going to die tonight unless you're willing to trust someone who spent 15 years lying to you about everything that matters. Through the warehouse speakers, I could hear a familiar voice from our confrontation at the police station. Mr. Chen, we know you're in there. Send out the girl, and we'll allow you to disappear quietly. Continue to resist, and we'll kill you both and burn down the building to eliminate any evidence of our conversation. Marcus looked at me with an expression that mixed desperation with something that might have been genuine love. Emma, I can get you out of this alive, but only if you follow my instructions exactly and don't ask questions until we're safe. Marcus led me to a hidden room behind a false wall, where I discovered something that changed my understanding of everything that had happened to our family. The space was filled with audio equipment and dozens of cassette tapes labeled with dates spanning from 2008 to just weeks before Sarah's death. Your mother suspected I wasn't who I claimed to be almost from the beginning, Marcus said, playing one of the earliest recordings. But instead of confronting me directly, she began documenting everything, our conversations, my habits, inconsistencies in my cover story. Sarah's voice filled the room, younger and more trusting than the frightened woman I'd heard in the piano recording. March 20th, 2008. Robert has been having nightmares again, speaking in what sounds like Mandarin. When I asked him about it this morning, he claimed not to remember dreaming at all. But he's never mentioned speaking Chinese before. There were dozens of similar recordings. Sarah's growing suspicions documented with the methodical attention of someone trained in legal investigation. She'd noticed that Robert had no childhood friends, no family photographs, no stories about his past that could be verified. She documented his unusual knowledge of surveillance techniques, his ability to identify law enforcement vehicles, his habit of checking exits whenever they entered unfamiliar buildings. She was building a case against me, Marcus said, his voice carrying respect and sadness. Not because she wanted to prosecute me, but because she was trying to understand whether I was protecting her or threatening her. But it was the final series of recordings that revealed the truth I'd never suspected. February 14th, 2023. Sarah's voice was different now, older but calmer, as if she'd finally found the answer she'd been seeking. I know you're listening to these, Marcus. I know you've been monitoring my activity since the day we met. And I know why you really killed Robert Morrison and took his identity. Marcus stopped the tape and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. She figured it out, he said quietly. All of it. He restarted the recording. And Sarah's voice continued, "You didn't kill Robert Morrison to create a cover identity for a federal protection operation. You killed him because he discovered evidence of the same money laundering networks I was investigating. Robert Morrison wasn't an innocent high school teacher. He was a federal informant who'd been gathering evidence about financial crimes in Portland. The implications hit me like ice water. My real father hadn't been an innocent victim of Marcus's cover operation. He'd been another federal witness, someone whose research had complemented Sarah's investigation. When the criminal organizations realized that both Sarah Chen in Seattle and Robert Morrison in Portland were investigating the same financial networks, they hired me to eliminate both threats." Marcus continued the story that Sarah's recording had started. "But when I got to Morrison's house and found you there, when I realized that killing him would orphan a 13-year-old girl who'd already lost her mother to cancer, I made a choice that broke my professional protocol. You decided to save both of us. I decided to create a scenario where Sarah Chen and Robert Morrison would both disappear, but their research would be preserved and their children would be protected." Marcus showed me files that revealed the full scope of what he planned. "Instead of killing them both, I relocated Sarah and took you as her daughter, creating a family unit that would be harder for the criminal organizations to track. But Sarah's recording revealed that she'd understood even more than." Marcus realized, "The beautiful thing about your plan, Marcus, is that it worked perfectly for 6 years. Emma got a loving mother. I got a daughter to replace the children I never had. And you got to be the kind of father you probably never thought you deserved to be. We became a real family built on the foundation of your professional deception. Then, why did you kill her?" I asked. Marcus played the final recording, dated just days before Sarah's car accident. "Marcus, if you're listening to this, then something has happened to me and you've probably told Emma some version of the truth to explain why I'm gone. I want her to know that I discovered your real identity years ago, and I chose to stay because I loved the family we'd built together. But I also want her to know that I made arrangements to ensure her safety if our cover was ever compromised." "What kind of arrangements?" "Sarah contacted Detective Martinez not to report my crimes, but to establish a contingency plan in case the criminal organizations ever found us. She'd been working with federal agents to document everything we knew about the money laundering networks, creating a comprehensive case that could be activated if anything happened to our family." Marcus showed me the final piece of evidence of federal witness protection, agreement signed by Sarah Chen and Robert Morrison's daughter, guaranteeing us new identities and permanent relocation in exchange for testimony that would bring down the entire criminal network. "Your mother's car accident was staged, Emma. Sarah isn't dead, she's in witness protection, waiting for the day when it will be safe to reveal that she survived and bring down the people who've been hunting our family for 15 years. Through the warehouse's security system, I could hear the sound of vehicles surrounding the building. But Marcus seemed almost relieved as he activated communications equipment that connected us to federal agents I'd never known were involved. This is Agent Chen requesting immediate extraction for 2 federal witnesses. The cover operation is blown, but we have enough evidence to proceed with prosecution. The federal agents who extracted us from the warehouse weren't from any agency I'd heard of, but they moved with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd been planning this operation for years. As we were helicoptered to a secure facility outside the city, Agent Sarah Chen, my mother, still alive after 3 months of believing she was dead, explained the final layer of deception that had protected our family for 15 years. "Emma," she said, looking older but unmistakably alive, "everything you discovered about our family was both true and false. Marcus really did kill the original Robert Morrison, but he did it as part of a federal operation designed to protect multiple witness families who were investigating the same criminal networks. The secure facility turned out to be a complex where dozens of families lived under federal protection, all witnesses to various aspects of the international money laundering operation that Sarah and my biological father had been investigating. But it was the revelation about my real identity that shattered everything I believed about myself. The girl you think you are, Emma Morrison, daughter of a murdered high school teacher, never existed, Sarah continued, showing me documents that traced my real origins. The child that Marcus saved from the Portland house wasn't Robert Morrison's daughter. She was a federal agent's daughter who'd been placed with Morrison as part of a deep cover operation. Marcus, whose real name was apparently David Chun, Sarah's brother and the federal agent, added the final pieces. Your biological father was Agent Michael Torres, who'd been investigating money laundering operations in Portland under the cover identity of Robert Morrison. When his identity was compromised, the federal operation required his elimination to protect other agents in the network. But you didn't eliminate him, I said, understanding flooding through me. You eliminated the cover identity and relocated the real agent. Michael Torres became David Chun's handler in a protection operation that lasted 15 years, Sarah explained. The man you knew as your father was actually my brother, protecting both of us while gathering evidence from within the criminal organizations that had hired him as an assassin. The documents showed the true scope of what had been a multi-agency operation spanning 2 decades. The criminal networks Sarah had been investigating weren't just money laundering operations, they were financial systems used by intelligence agencies, terrorist organizations, and multinational corporations to move classified funding around the world. Emma, Sarah said gently, your real name is Sophia Torres. Your father is alive and has been coordinating your protection from inside the federal witness program. Everything that happened to our family was part of an operation designed to gather enough evidence to shut down financial networks that threaten national security. What about the car accident? What about your death? Staged as part of the final phase of the operation. We needed the criminal organizations to believe they'd eliminated the primary witness while we prepared for mass arrests and prosecutions. Agent Michael Torres, my real father, entered the briefing room looking exactly like the man I'd known as Robert Morrison, but wearing the confidence of someone who spent 15 years successfully maintaining one of the most complex cover operations in federal law enforcement history. Sophia, he said, using a name that felt foreign but somehow familiar. I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand that every choice we made was about protecting you while gathering evidence against people who've killed dozens of federal agents and witnesses over the past 20 years. The final revelation was that the entire Morrison family identity had been a federal operation from the beginning. I hadn't been kidnapped or relocated. I'd been raised by 2 federal agents who genuinely fallen in love while maintaining cover identities that lasted longer than anyone had anticipated. The beautiful thing about our operation, Sarah said, is that it became real. David and I weren't just playing husband and wife, we became a family with you. The love was genuine, even if the identities were manufactured. But the criminal organizations that have been hunting us, they're still out there. Not anymore, Michael said, showing me news reports from the past 24 hours. While you were discovering the truth about our family, federal agencies across 12 countries were conducting simultaneous raids based on the evidence we've been gathering for 15 years. Over 200 arrests, billions of dollars in seized assets, and the complete dismantling of financial networks that threaten international security. Through the facility's windows, I could see other families, other witness protection cases watching news coverage of what was being called the largest international law enforcement operation in history. The case is closed, Sophia, Sarah said. The people who threatened our family are either dead or in custody. We can go home now. Where is home? I asked. Michael smiled, and it was the same warm expression I'd known my entire life, even if everything else about our situation had been revealed as an elaborate fiction. Wherever we decide to build it, he said. Together as a family with our real names and our real identities and no more secrets between us. But even as my parents spoke about freedom and new beginnings, I realized that I'd spent 28 years learning to be Emma Morrison. Sophia Torres was a stranger to me, and I wasn't sure I was ready to give up the identity I'd lived my entire life, even if that identity had been built on necessary lies. 3 months later, I stood in the same house where I'd grown up, but now it felt like a museum of someone else's life. The federal operation was complete, the criminal networks dismantled, and the Torres family was free to live openly for the first time in decades. But freedom came with choices I hadn't expected to face. "You can be anyone you want to be now," Sarah said as we packed the last of our belongings from the Morrison house. Sophia Torres with a family history of federal service, or Emma Morrison starting fresh with the truth about her past, or someone entirely new. Michael, I was still learning to think of him as my father rather than the man who'd pretended to be my father, had been offered positions with several federal agencies based on his successful long-term cover operation. But he'd also been offered the chance to disappear completely, to build a life that had no connection to law enforcement or criminal investigation. "What do you want to do?" I asked them both. "After 20 years of living lies to protect people like me, what do you actually want for your own lives?" It was the first completely honest conversation we'd had as a family, with no cover identities to maintain and no operations to protect. And what I discovered was that the people I'd known as Robert and Sarah Morrison had been more authentic than I'd realized. "I want to teach," Michael said, "not as a cover identity, but because I genuinely enjoyed working with students and helping them understand history. The federal work was necessary, but it was never what made me happy. I want to practice law again," Sarah said, "but not as a federal prosecutor hunting international criminals. I want to help families that have been damaged by the kinds of operations we've been part of. And I want to understand who I really am," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Not Emma Morrison, not Sophia Torres, but whoever I might have become if I'd grown up knowing the truth. We decided to keep the Morrison house but live in it as the Torres family, maintaining the connections I'd built over 28 years while embracing the identities we'd hidden for so long. It was a compromise between the lives we'd lived and the people we actually were. But the final confrontation with our past came when Detective Martinez visited to close the case files that had been accumulating for 15 years. "The caretaker doesn't exist anymore," she said, reviewing documents that officially ended the investigation into the serial killer who'd never actually killed anyone, except in service of federal operations. David Chan was a federal agent protecting witnesses, not a criminal eliminating threats. "But people did die," I said. "The real Robert Morrison, other witnesses who couldn't be relocated in time, federal agents who were killed investigating these networks. People die in wars, Emma," Martinez replied. "And what your family was part of was essentially a war between law enforcement and criminal organizations that threatened national security. The casualties were tragic but necessary. The moral complexity was something I was still learning to process. My family had participated in operations that required deception, identity theft, and the elimination of threats. But they'd done it to protect innocent people and dismantle networks that killed hundreds of victims." "There's something else you need to know," Martinez said, handing me a final file. "The federal operation identified 12 other children who'd been displaced by witness protection cases over the past 20 years. Kids who grew up thinking they were orphans or adopted when they were actually federal witnesses whose parents' cover identities required family separation. Other people like me? Other families like yours. And the government is offering all of you the same choice: continue living under manufactured identities, return to your original families if they're still alive, or create entirely new lives with full federal support." The file contained contact information for support groups, counseling services, and legal assistance for people who discovered that their entire identities had been constructed by federal agencies. I wasn't alone in struggling to understand who I really was. 6 months later, I was working as a counselor for other federal witness families, helping children and adults who discovered that their lives had been built on necessary lies. My parents had returned to teaching and legal work, but now we did it as the Torres family with full knowledge of our complicated history. The Morrison house became a safe space for families transitioning out of witness protection, and the piano where I'd found Mom's recording became a symbol of truth finally being revealed instead of secrets being hidden. I kept the name Emma, not because Morrison was my real family, but because Emma was who I'd chosen to become. Despite everything I learned about my origins, identity I discovered was more about choices than genetics or government operations. And sometimes, in the evening when I played the piano that has started this entire journey, I could hear echoes of all the lives our family had lived, some real, some manufactured, but all part of the complicated truth of who we'd become together. The final choice had been mine, to embrace the complexity of loving people who lied to protect me, and to build a future based on truth rather than the convenient fiction that had kept us safe. Some secrets I learned were worth keeping for love, but some truths were worth revealing for freedom. And knowing the difference between them was the most important lesson my family had ever taught me.